Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is November 11, year 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And usually I acknowledge the people here in the live chat, but we have a very, very special guest here. And I'm really excited about what he's about to reveal to us. So let's just go right into him. You have been following his work. And by the way, he's on Subscribestar, and I encourage you to subscribe to his feeds here. It's well worth your money. You're going to learn a lot, not just about specific crimes, but you're going to learn about the society. The types of crimes that are committed in society reveal a lot about our political system and our culture. And his name is Manny Grossman. He's out in the New York area. He's a landscape architect by profession, and he's an instructor, teacher, and educator, and an incredible articulate and historian of his region, his part of the world. And it brings a great deal of veracity, immediacy to one of the most famous, infamous crimes in the annals of American true crime. And that's the so-called Son of Sam murders that were purported, well, they were attributed to one David Berkowitz. So let me bring Manny in here to give us an update on his incredible path-breaking research. Manny,
Hey,
welcome. It's good to see you.
it's great to see you, Professor. Thanks so much for having me on once again. I was really looking forward to this.
Now, what's new with the SOS, Son of Sam?
Oh, the question is, what isn't new? That's the real question. Since the last time we met, it's light years beyond where I could have even imagined back then. We, especially now that I'm on Subscribestar and I'm able to actually basically do this as a full-time job, we have gotten into the stratosphere with this. We have taken this so far beyond where Maury Terry was. And unfortunately for the Son of Sam heads out there, the ones who still believe wholeheartedly in every word in the ultimate evil, you're going to hear some bad news today, folks. We have a lot of updates. So basically, since the last time the professor and I spoke, we have done we've gotten way more connected to basically the on the ground people in Yonkers. And remember, what I'm doing with this crowdsourced investigation is also a cultural anthropology and a sociological study as well. So we are getting deep, what I'm calling deep Yonkers grit at this point. We have met people in Yonkers, Professor, who basically I'm the only one at this point who has actually interviewed a witness to seeing David Berkowitz and John Carr actually physically together in Untermeyer Park. But unfortunately, the story isn't quite so simple. So what am I talking about here? Well, we have spoken to a few people who were intimate with Untermeyer Park like you could not believe. The first was a guy called the Caveman. Who was the Caveman? Well, he first showed up at Untermeyer Park in 1975 as a 15-year-old, basically a street kid from Yonkers. And by his own admission, he hooked up with what he called the devil worshippers, okay? And then by 1980, he was actually living in the park full time, and he lived in Untermeyer Park that's why they called him the Caveman. He lived in those structures, those underground structures in the park for a total of 8 years from 1980 to 1988. So his experience there is deep and very, very vast and long, too. He spans from 75 to about 1988. And what did he say that really broke the paradigm for me and made me realize that Maury Terry's work needs to be re-examined? Not wholly, because I do want to, as I always like to say about Maury Terry, Maury's going to go down in history for two reasons, in my opinion. One, his forensic work on the shootings. He was the person who, without a doubt, proved that Berkowitz could not have acted alone simply from the forensic work on the shooting alone. He didn't need to have the cult in Untermeyer or any of the stuff that the process, Charles Manson, all the other stuff that he brought in. But sorry, I got a little off track. What was I just saying?
You were talking about Maury Terry's incredible contributions to the forensic.
Right, yes.
But he's lacking in certain other areas.
Correct. The forensic work on the shootings and his spotlight on Yonkers, that he put a spotlight that there was something weird going on in Yonkers, for absolutely sure. Me and the spirit of Maury Terry are in 100% agreement. But what I'm finding is that Maury painted what was going on in Yonkers with such a broad brush so as to make the information useless. What do I mean by that? Well, the caveman who walked around with my investigative partner now, Jason Goodman, who we started doing a weekly show together several months ago, and it's evolved into him now basically coming out on most of these interviews that I do to be a part of it. It's actually, in our opinion, quite historic. So we walked around Untermeyer Park with the caveman, and he told us some very interesting things, which of course ticked my sociological boxes. One, he said that he was a member of the devil worshippers, and that Berkey, he called him Berkey, and he sold drugs to Berkey. He said that he sold monkey tranquilizers, which actually might actually come in connection later when we talk about a doctor named Dr. Gajdusek, who was involved with all sorts of weird medical experiments and had access to, of course, these incredibly intense drugs. But he said that Berkowitz, now remember, this guy was in the park every day. He said that Berkowitz and the Car Boys, okay, would always hang out in their own little section, and that they were not part of any established devil worshiping group whatsoever in Untermeyer Park. He said they had a different religion. He didn't quite expand upon that, but it seems to me from what he was saying that there was several different occultic groups happening in Untermeyer Park, which of course that's nuance that we did not get from the Ultimate Evil. Maury Terry put all of the occultic activity in Untermeyer Park and said it was Son of Sam. He equated the two. But what we're finding is that this occultic activity took place, of course, from the 50s all the way up to the 90s. And how do you explain those 2 years of Son of Sam, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. But now it's starting to. We're realizing that there was an established group of devil worshippers in that park. There could have been 2 or 3. We'll get into that in a second. But that Berkowitz and his group were not part of it. Two, he said that he never heard of the term the 22 disciples of hell or the children. And nobody, strangely enough, Professor, and please interject if you ever have any questions, he said that nobody heard of it. And in my research, I hate to say it, I have not met one person, and I'm getting deep Yonkers grit, who ever heard of the 22 disciples of hell. It seems to be one of these made up names that really worked well in the newspaper, but that had no real reality on the ground in Yonkers. He also said that Berkowitz's group never numbered more than 6 or 7 people. Okay, they weren't 22 disciples of hell. He also said that there was absolutely no women that ever hung out with Berkowitz and Carr, which also goes against what Maury Terry, the thesis that there was a high priestess named Suzanne Conway. We have basically proven that Maury Terry didn't give any nuance whatsoever, but that wasn't it. Okay, because this guy was a drug addict, he was homeless, he still is to this day, and so all right, maybe he's not believable. But then we found, and this is amazing, in 1988 there was a famous Unsolved Mysteries show dedicated to the Son of Sam. A lot of people have seen that. In fact, it's one of the sort of the keys into the case. You have the Ultimate Evil, and then you have these old documentaries that came out that Maury Terry was associated with. In that documentary, as they're walking around Untermeyer Park, the narrator says, while filming at Untermeyer Park, we were stopped by 2 teenagers who told us of their experiences in the park and then proceeded to show Maury Terry around, showing him the Devil's Cave, where they found dead animals. We found that person, Professor. Not only did we find that person, but he agreed to actually go out to Untermeyer Park with us, where we proceeded to make about an 1.5 hour long video with him detailing not only that day with Maury Terry, but also telling us very similar things, that these occultic activities took place well into the 80s, up until the 90s almost, that he saw literally about 50 rituals I don't want to get into the things that he said he actually witnessed and heard. It gets very, very dark and deep with animal sacrifice and ritualistic sacrifice of animals. But he said some very interesting things to us that really shattered the narrative. He said that Maury Terry was almost obsessed with trying to get him and his parents to say, yeah, Berkowitz was here. Yeah, Berkowitz was here, right? Yeah, he kept on trying to convince them of that, and they never saw Berkowitz there, okay? That notwithstanding, he never heard of the 22 Disciples of Hell either. But the thing that was the most interesting for our research, and which is going to take us into the topic of today, is that he said that the police in Yonkers all knew what was going on in Untermeyer Park, and that they warned his parents very starkly. They said, there are very wealthy and elite people behind what's happening in this park. Don't look into it. Okay. Basically, the cops all sort of knew what was happening, and they were scared, which is quite interesting to me. When we learn about this Dr. Gajdusek that we're going to talk in a little while, it's starting to become clear why they were scared. This guy was very, very connected. So we have basically updated the narrative, and quite frankly, it's getting very confusing because now, of course, we don't know what the truth really is. It probably lies somewhere in between Maury and what these people were saying. But we just cannot prove the 22 Disciples of Hell existed. We can't. We have Berkey as being a member of a very small group in there, but without a doubt, we have brought the first person in the world that ever actually witnessed Berkowitz and Carr together in the park and gave testimony about it. And so that those videos just recently came out, and I call them a 1-2 punch against the narrative of the ultimate evil. I also heard from a friend of mine in the publishing industry who had friends at Maury's publishing house, that his initial manuscript was actually very milquetoast in a sense. It was like basically based in Yonkers, right? And that the publisher said, sex it up. This is not going to sell. And then his next manuscript included the process and Charles Manson and all that stuff that now has become so controversial. Even Carl Denaro, a Son of Sam victim, told Maury, hey, you should have thrown away 150 pages out of this book and it would have been awesome, right?
So that accounts for his inclusion in the very first chapter of the Arliss Perry murder at Stanford University.
Exactly.
So that was an attempt on the publisher to, as you put it, sex it up.
To sex it up. I'm sorry, I'm just sweating. It's very hot in my apartment. Exactly. He just bringing in this nationwide conspiracy. And of course, now we know that the person who in all likelihood killed Arliss Perry had nothing to do with North Dakota, John Carr, as it says in the book. It was most likely the security guard, Stephen Crawford, who police initially suspected did the crime, did that crime. So the narrative is shattering. And to a lot of people, it's like not cool that it's shattering, right? But for me, somebody who's actually interested in on the ground research, cultural anthropology, sociology, this is like a dream for me because I'm actually meeting the people who lived this, not just read out of a book. And that's the information that we're bringing to people. But then it got taken a little further, Professor. We actually hooked up with Detective Jim Rothstein, the legendary NYPD detective, who for some reason felt good with us, with what we're doing. And he opened up way more to us than he ever has to any interviewer before. And he actually mailed me very, very important documents from his time working with Maury Terry on the Son of Sam investigation in the 90s. And so I got sent a packet of documents, and it just totally blew my mind. It made me realize that, whoa, this thing was part of a much larger umbrella. And so what am I talking about? Well, we're talking about the whole nexus of the mafia, control of the gay bars, the gay bars as places where they were pimping kids out of, trafficking kids, selling child pornography, and so on and so forth. And there was this whole network that was being investigated in the early to mid 70s, and the NYPD investigation was called Operation Together. And this is an extremely rich avenue of research for people to get into because it's completely untapped. I'm not the first person to bring this up. I mean, the New York Times wrote an article on this in 1974, but nobody talks about this, especially in relation to Son of Sam. And why is this important? This Operation Together, because the mobsters, the traffickers, the people involved in the child pornography business, it turns out that there was connections between them and down in the city and Yonkers, Untermeyer Park. And what we found was there was one character, a character by the name of Ace Brown, who has no, he was a pimp. I call him Ace the Hinge Brown. He was a pimp from Yonkers, and he was literally the hinge. He was the key. He was the middle point between Times Square and the trafficking of runaways that were coming into New York City, and kids getting killed up in Untermeyer Park in rituals. And so we got a hold of a document that Maury Terry wrote to Jim Rothstein. And it turned out that Jim Rothstein was actually going to interview Ace Brown in 1996. And the document that we got had a whole bunch of names associated with Son of Sam and this Operation Together. But what was very interesting about this document, and people, I'll put it up on my Twitter, because I'm not about like hiding things from the public. I want people to have all this. Please do the research. I don't want to be the only one doing this. And so there's a little blurb at the bottom of one of the pages. It says, "Pictures identified by David Berkowitz." And some of these names were pretty intense. Shelley Seiden, Steve London, major traffickers of children in this Operation Together investigation. And the question, of course, is, how did Berkowitz know these people? How did he get involved with them? And the answer is we don't know yet. But there was a very interesting name on this document, and that's what's going to tie into the subject for today. There was a doctor's name of Dr. Carleton Gajdusek that Maury and Detective Rothstein were very interested in finding out more from Ace Brown about. So they actually met with Ace Brown in '96. We don't know the results, unfortunately, of that interview. I have to do more interviewing with the detective. But this Gajdusek character has taken us on a whole new direction, Professor. And that, of course, takes us into the abduction of Etan Pates. Do you remember the Etan Pates incident?
I do not. That was a new name that you introduced to me. Please expound on Etan Pates.
Sure. Etan Pates, Professor Hamamoto, was the first milk carton kid. You may remember the phenomenon in the late 70s and early 80s of the kids on the milk cartons, abducted kids. And it was a very famous case here in New York City of Etan Pates, a 6-year-old boy from the Soho neighborhood in Lower Manhattan, born to artistic parents. They sort of let him out. You know, it was kind of weird, that whole story with his parents. But the upshot is he gets abducted in 1979, never seen again. They end up arresting a couple of hapless homeless guys, drug addicts. One of them was convicted, but then let out. The other one, like, they couldn't really prove it, and so on and so forth. And basically, no one knew what was up. Well, once I started hearing about Gajdusek, all of a sudden, these files started coming in from this crowdsourced investigation. And one file in particular came into my inbox one day, and it blew the whole thing out of the water. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. Several months ago, I did a walk and talk with a detective named Mike Codell, who was a very, very hardcore New York City cop. This guy was serious. He wrote a book called Alphaville. It's a great book for those who were interested in New York City grit from the 80s. In 1996, a convict by the name of John Tiny Lentini got in touch with Detective Codell from, I think he was in Attica or Greenhaven. He was in jail for what? For serious molestation of his own biological daughter. Okay, so this is a guy who's ticking the boxes, right? He's involved in pedophilia, Tiny Lentini also happened to be the head of a motorcycle gang called the Rat Pack. Okay. He came to Codell with a very explosive story. Now, he wanted to get out of jail, no doubt. But Codell took his story very seriously. Why? Well, I'll tell you why in a second, but he came to Detective Codell saying, I was there at the ritual murder of Etan Pates. And it was a guy named Dr. Gajdusek, who's named in the Rothstein files. Okay. Now remember, Lentini didn't know Rothstein and all of this stuff. All of these things are coming together. Lentini tells Codell that Etan Pates was brought to a mansion in Westchester where Gajdusek and his wealthy elitist friends basically performed ritual murder and killed Etan Pates on an altar that night, and that Lentini and his motorcycle gang were providing security for it all. Okay, all right, not an angel, for sure, but the reason, but Mike Codell took it extremely seriously. He was a hardened detective. He knew when people were lying. He knew when people were telling the truth. He said that there was a lot of truth. And for those who are interested in that story, you could go to. It's actually not on my YouTube. It's on Mike Codell's YouTube, and his YouTube site is called Up Against the Wall. Mike Codell YouTube.
Could you give us a spelling on Mike Codell's last name, please?
Codella. Now, okay. Mike had told this story for years. Okay, he has done podcasts on it, but none of these podcasts had any traction. I think the main reason is because they just weren't visually interesting, and I don't think the interviewers knew what to do with this. But Mike Codell and I actually met on the Lower East Side, and we walked around all of his former beat, and he proceeded to tell us the entire story of meeting Lentini in '96 and the whole Gajdusek connection there. I mean, we didn't even talk about Gajdusek there. He was just saying that rich people in Westchester. Okay, so you have Mike Codell, in New York City hearing about this. Then I get in my email inbox several weeks ago a confidential report written by the Yonkers Police Department. Okay, now this was an explosive document. This document was written by Detective Kevin Murphy, who, for Son of Sam heads, they all know Kevin Murphy. He worked closely with Maury Terry. He worked closely with Detective Rothstein, and he was also in the Netflix documentary where he talks about the investigation. So Murphy was a detective in the Yonkers Police Department. He proceeds to write a 4-page memo, like a DD5, like here's where we are now with this investigation type of document.
Do you have copies of that document?
I do, and I will put those up on my Twitter as well. They already are out there because I have done a couple shows on this, but of course my show is on Subscribestar, so fewer people can see it because it's it's a subscriber only type of thing. I had to get off YouTube, Professor. It just became so untenable with the trolls taking up all my time, and it just became, and this literally became a full-time job. It was either like, go to subscriber only or stop, because it was, killing I just had no time for anything else. And, when you're in a relationship, it's not the best thing to be, concentrating on something that you're not getting paid for and devoting 40 hours a week to it, So the Kevin Murphy documents really brought it all together. And I'll put these on my Twitter after the show today. Kevin Murphy proceeded to write a 3-page document talking about a Nobel Prize winning doctor named Dr. Carleton Gajdusek. And of course, where have we seen the name before? Well, on the Rothstein files, right? It's all starting to come together. So this document is amazing. And I'll put it up. Now it's redacted somewhat, but the real information is all there for you to see. He spoke to Tiny Lentini as well. Tiny Lentini told him the exact same story that he told Detective Mike Codell. Furthermore, though, David Berkowitz himself talked to an informant. Now, Berkowitz didn't know Lentini. Okay, so these are stories that are coming from 2 different avenues, not connected in any way. Berkowitz said that Dr. Gajdusek was involved with a very wealthy elitists, very high-powered people who were involved in the ritual murder of Etan Pates. So the whole document was about how they wanted to give Gajdusek actually immunity because they just wanted to get this information and solve that case. But Gajdusek, of course, retained a very high-powered deep state attorney down in Washington, D.C. And the next thing you know,
his name,
Mark Hulkower. It's spelled wrong in the document. It's spelled Hulkower, but I think it's actually Hulchower. But it'll autocorrect. He was a major deep state lawyer down in Washington, D.C. They got Gajdusek the hell out of Dodge. He went to Norway, where he lived free for the rest of his life. So once you start to research this guy Gajdusek, right? So you have the word of Lentini, you have the word of Berkowitz. Okay, it doesn't mean much, but let's put the third piece of the puzzle together. Dr. Gajdusek was called in his obituary in the LA Times an unrepentant pedophile. Now, I think that now is a good time to show that video, Professor, because I want to give the audience a feel for this guy before we start talking more about him.
Do you want to skip the flow chart? I mean, you pretty much covered it. So
let's skip the flow chart for now, and let's just hit them with this because their jaws are going to drop when they hear what this guy has to say.
Here we go.
Then they start by getting close to them and telling them what they want to hear and praising them with excessive hugs and holding on a little longer.
On the right.
And the child may respond to that because a lot of these kids need love and they want love and they're getting it. And then it slowly progresses. And the next thing they know, this adult is doing something to them that's confusing.
It's freezing up here for some reason.
Uh-oh. The deep state knows.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's put this in the refrigerator for a moment. We can look at his photos, his portraits with this here.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if this is legible, but go ahead.
No, this is perfectly legible. This is great. So I have a great crowdsourcer. See, my investigation is not...
Manny?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello? 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 Can you hear me, Professor? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? Are we back? Check one. Hello? Professor, can you hear me? Not quite sure what's going on, folks, but I'll talk a little bit more about Gajdusek. Hopefully I'm still on the air. So for the
Manny?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we're back here.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I had to leave the page here.
That's cool. I was covering. I went into I was starting another spiel.
Okay, no, good. Let me the clip disappeared, so let me load it while you're continuing with the narrative. Thank you.
So this clip, by the way, guys, you can see this documentary. It's a clip from a much larger documentary called Storyville, The Genius and the Boys. And it was done by BBC and it was all about Dr. Gajdusek. Now, Gajdusek was a major, major scientist. He worked for the NIH. He worked at Walter Reed. Here we go.
Close to them and
there we go. I think it's back. So we'll let the audience see this. It seems
what
to be
they want to
free.
hear and praising them with excessive hugs and holding on a little longer. And the child may respond to that because a lot of these kids need love and they want love and they're getting it. And then it slowly progresses. And the next thing they know, this adult is doing something to them that's confusing to them, but frankly, from a physiological standpoint, may feel...
My first experience with him in a sexual way was when he approached me when I was a young child, about 7 or 8 years old.
He's talking about Gajdusek.
In my bed in Salem when where I lived.
This is one of his victims.
Growing up. And he would come to me in the middle of the night and fondle me and talk to me and try to impress upon me his views of the world and his travels and all in a way to impress me and to awe me with his importance. He would compliment me and compliment my body and then gradually ease his way into touching me, either by telling me about my parts of my body and how they operated from a scientific standpoint. And then he would, pull my pants down, my pajama bottoms, and would then touch me on my genitals. And then, maybe pull them back up and then talk to me a little bit more. And he kissed me on my genitals again. So that it was almost as if there was nothing unnatural about it whatsoever. But it was repeated over a number of years where he would come to me and sexually abuse me.
This is sick. Prepare
I
yourselves.
have never once taken a kid to my bed. They have come to my bed, and I am no one to kick them out. If they hug me and I find them playing with my cock, I say, good on you, I play with theirs. And I'll do it now and with great pleasure.
When you grow up with a culture that does not condone this, that totally objects
No
to
culture
it,
condones it.
surely it must hurt you when you get subjected to a grown-up forcing sexuality on you.
Boy, what a brainwashed person you are. With 300 or 400 boys who had sex with me from 8 and 10 and 12, 100% have run into my bed, jumped in without my mentioning it, and asked for sex. I have never asked for it. And most of my friends, don't you realize that I was jumping in people's beds hoping they would take me? All boys want a lover. My God.
You as a kid.
And the idea that these men go after you don't have any point in the world. Now come on, that's the rule of the game.
Look at his eyes here, right there. I can see that guy standing over Etan Pates on an altar. But yeah, that's hard stuff to stomach.
Wow.
So this is a guy who won a Nobel Prize, by the way. Okay, he was heavily involved in research into mad cow disease and prions. He worked at the NIH. But we're finding things about him that are just indicating that he might have been protected from an early age. This was a sick bastard. Okay, no doubt about it. But he also was apparently very, very smart. We have articles from his childhood in Yonkers where he was, massively advanced academically. He finished his pre-med work in like 2 years. And he was given an army commission in 1941 when he was, 18 or 19. And they made him a lieutenant. So he was military from an early age. And then we found this really weird article where he was in Tehran. And I'll put this article up for you guys on Twitter. Just go to Manny Grossman Twitter. Actually, it might be Grossman Manny, but it'll just type it into any search engine. And this article was weird because there's no byline in the article, but it talks about how Gajdusek met two other guys from Yonkers in a hotel lobby in Tehran, Iran, just by random accident. Which is strange, right? What are the chances of that happening? But then we found a movie put out by, I believe, Syracuse University, where basically the same people he met in that hotel lobby in Iran worked on the video with him. The video is called Rabies in Man, and it was done at the Pasteur Institute in Tehran, Iran, in the same year that he met these two guys. And everything is meshing. So the article's a lie. Then we found out that one of the guys in the article taught at a very elite private institution called the Hackley School, which just happened to have a major sexual abuse scandal in those years. And he resigned, right? So the things that we're finding out about this guy seem to indicate that Gajdusek was protected. He was somewhat probably some form of intelligence. He had clearance. And because of that, he was allowed to, with impunity, Professor, ply his evil trade. He brought in from Micronesia about 50 kids to live with him, boys, okay, young boys. And we just saw what he said, that he had 400 boys, right? And also what was interesting in that little clip, and he said, most of my friends were the same way. So that means that he definitely is hanging out with a network doing this, which is exactly what Berkowitz and Lentini said, that he was at this mansion where it was Gajdusek and all his elitist friends that were having a satanic ritual of some sort, and that they murdered Etan Pates on an altar there. And then what happened, according to Codell, Detective Codell, Mike Codell, was that the body was taken to some farm upstate and buried. And he actually went up to that farm, and they would not give him permission at all to run any ground penetrating radar or anything like that. And then what happened was, just like in Son of Sam, and just like in Operation Together.
Now, ground penetrating radars to what? Search for remains?
Search for remains.
Okay.
But what happened after he went up there was NYPD shut him down. And even furthermore, all his files were, guess where? World Trade Center 7.
Oh.
Okay, so they were all destroyed on 9/11. Operation Together was shut down in 1974. Same thing.
And the chief of the World Trade Center, when it went down, was a former FBI man. He also was killed there.
Right.
He went
yes,
down with
I remember
the
that guy.
building. Yes, I forgot his name.
Yeah, it was like Mick something or other. It was like an Irish name, from what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember that story. And of course, I knew on the day of 9/11 that we were being hoodwinked. Because I had already woken up by Oklahoma City. That was my wake up point for me personally. But this Gajdusek, I don't know. Our focus of research now is on this because it's connecting now with Son of Sam. We're seeing that the cast of characters is the same. And just like I said before, that Ace the Hinge Brown, the pimp from Yonkers, who was the hinge between 42nd Street and Yonkers, guess who else was written up in the Murphy letters as knowing Gajdusek? None other than Ace Brown. So David Berkowitz said that Ace Brown and Gajdusek they knew each other very well. And a question that I had, because we had Mike Codell on our show where we read the Murphy letter for the first time to the world. And I said to him, this doesn't sound believable to me. I was very skeptical. I said, what are the chances of a Nobel Prize winning scientist hanging out with a pimp from Walnut Street in Yonkers? And then Mike Codell basically said to me, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, hey, Schmendrick, when you want kids, you have to go to where they're going to you have to go to the people who are going to get you them, right? So Gajdusek and Ace Brown were like that apparently. And so now you have Lentini, Berkowitz talking about Ace Brown being friends with Gajdusek. You have them talking about Gajdusek being at the ritual murder of Etan Pates. It's all coming together. And it makes sense if you think about it, because they never actually really had any, like these guys that they put into jail for brief periods of time, Pedro Hernandez and Jose Ramos, complete hapless, mentally ill patients that there was no proof of it. But one of them actually was quite interesting, Professor, if I may. Jose Ramos, the guy who went in, I think he went to jail first for the crime. And then they got a guy named Pedro Hernandez. Again, neither was proven to do it. They were both mentally ill. But Jose Ramos was quite interesting to Son of Sam, because Jose Ramos, who was friends with Etan Pates' babysitter, he lived in Van Cortlandt Park, which is another park associated with these Son of Sam rituals and these cultic middle of the night rituals. So my contention, and I'm just spitballing, was that if Jose Ramos was involved, he was a procurer. He knew of Etan Pates' existence. Maybe he knew people in Van Cortlandt Park that were getting paid by Ace Brown and Gajdusek to get them kids. Maybe they needed a certain type of look of kid. This is just spitballing. I have no proof of any of this, but the pieces are fitting together with this cast of characters. So this whole Gajdusek avenue is extremely rich. It goes into I say with the caveman, when I walked around with the caveman in Untermeyer Park, that was the streets. Now I'm into the sweets. Okay.
Yes.
So basically this guy hung with a rarefied crowd, and he was allowed to just go to Norway, live out the rest of his life, and die a free man.
Now, did he become a Norwegian citizen? Was he a naturalized Norwegian citizen? Gajdusek?
I don't know the answer to that, Professor. I really
Okay.
am not sure.
Because Rita Wilson and Tom Hanks are now Greek citizens. And it'd be
Okay.
interesting to see if they have an extradition treaty between the U.S. and Greece, or Norway and the United States. Not to
I think
impute anything about Tom Hanks, but when we're talking about social networks and the longitudinal continuity of this pedophilic state level agenda, then I think
right.
what you're researching here is so important to what's going down right here in 2021.
I agree because the Gajdusek networks are still in existence. This guy was heavily involved in NIH research, and of course we know the NIH and Anthony Fauci, total deep state evil people. And it's funny that you mentioned Tom Hanks out of all people that you could have, because someone said to me, go check out the CIA's Instagram page and see who they follow. They follow 36 people, one of whom is Tom Hanks. It's kind of weird in that regard. But you wouldn't think that the CIA would even have an Instagram page. That's very strange to me. But this guy Gajdusek, we sort of came at him from the back door, like we didn't even know he existed. Really.
Well, tell me at ground level, how did you find, I'll use his nickname, Caveman. How did you find, was he watching your show, or?
No, Caveman never read The Ultimate Evil. He didn't know, he doesn't have a computer. He has no clue, no cell phone. He has no clue that we even existed. The way we found him, Professor, I can't go into the details because that would unfortunately compromise my sources. And I know it sounds cryptic, and I know it sounds, crazy for me to say that, but I'm actually running a serious investigation here where I have to protect people who are getting me information. But a fan of the show, I'll just put it this way, is extremely connected in Yonkers. This guy knows everybody and everybody from the bottom level to the top level. A very connected individual, and he loves the show, and he became an investigative partner for me. He found me a bunch of people. He also was the guy who found me the Unsolved Mystery guy as well, which was a very, very deep find. But he found the Caveman. It was a weird confluence of events. He lost his wallet. Someone told him, the Caveman will know where your wallet is. Yonkers is a small town, Professor. Even though it's a big city, it's actually a really small town where everybody kind of knows everybody. So they said, go find Caveman. You'll find him at this junkyard. And so this guy went there, started talking to him, and Caveman said, yeah, I lived in Untermeyer. So of course, once you find that out, and the guy's 61 years old, well, then the inevitable question to any Son of Sam fan is, what'd you see? What'd you see? And this guy, again, just naturally speaking, he was like, yeah, Sam Carr was a prick. He would always, Sam Carr is the father of the brother of the sons of Sam, John and Michael Carr. Sam Carr was a prick. He was always calling the cops on us, and all of this stuff was ringing true. And he talked about mob hits, that Berkowitz was like, he talked about a mob hit at this diner called the Sawmill Diner. I went into the archives. I found out that this mob hit actually happened in the same year that he said it happened, with the same characters that he named in this audio. We have the tape of it. He also said something very interesting. He said that Berkowitz was at the Sawmill Diner just like 20 minutes before that mob hit. So of course that raises all sorts of other questions. But he also said something which I forgot to say earlier. He said that everybody in Untermeyer Park distrusted Berkowitz and the Carr brothers because everybody thought that they were cops, that they were law enforcement. And I had never heard that, never even thought about it. But then I said to myself, wait a second. Berkowitz actually was an auxiliary policeman. He was interested in this kind of stuff. He was an auxiliary policeman in the Bronx. So it's not such a stretch to think that maybe Berkowitz was still an auxiliary cop. And I mean, again, we don't know. But the picture that's emerging out of all this for me is that Maury Terry got it dead wrong about the social scene in Untermeyer Park. There were dozens of social groups in Untermeyer Park, all there together, but not mixing. Every now and then one would mix with the other to buy drugs, but that was about it. And that the devil worshippers, that the caveman, he said that they were all his friends. Now that doesn't make sense in a sense, because we heard from the cops, from the unsolved mystery guy, that the devil worshippers were actually elitists, high level doctors and lawyers like Gajdusek. But that could just mean that there were different levels of devil worshippers in the park. Maybe your ground level, and then maybe your elitist ones. But he said, of course, that the Berkey group, they were there. He saw them. They had zero whatsoever to do with any devil worship in the park. So the picture that's emerging for me is, and I've been thinking about this for months now, was that just like Manson might have been some sort of weird psyop, right? There's all sorts of hints of that. You have the CIA connection. You have Tom O'Neill's great book, Chaos and Operation Chaos. I'm starting to think that Son of Sam was just another project of Gladio, Operation Chaos, and it was just another one of these hyped up psyops on the American people to stoke fear and terror. Also to divide the sexes. You know, there's all sorts of plans that you can do. You could have a lot of different agendas in one.
There's another agenda, if I may interject.
Yeah, of course.
It's the gay liberation agenda. The famed White Horse Tavern down in the village, the West Village, which is commonly thought of as being as ground zero to the gay rights revolution, that was mob run.
Oh, you know, it's very interesting.
I don't think it was coincidental that this cultural revolution came at the same time when you have these sensational crimes that can be imputed to a madman with a gun, David Berkowitz.
Right.
Your thoughts on that?
I think that you're definitely onto something. And it's amazing that you even brought that up, because I just started a book today by an author named Philip Crawford called The Mafia and the Gays. And it's all about, oh, you have that book? Okay.
Yes, of course.
I just got it today. Philip is a viewer of my show, actually. He might be watching. Yeah, he might be watching right now.
Excellent piece of work, Philip.
Yeah, it's really well researched. And I have to say that I've been trying to get to work with Philip now for months, and he's a meticulous guy. Let's just put it that way. He's like, I don't want to go on your show until I'm absolutely ready with this new research. But he's becoming very interested in this Operation Together, because Operation Together, again, was that NYPD investigation into the nexus between the mob and the gay scene. So there's a whole rich vein there. And clearly the research is showing that there were crossovers. People associated with Son of Sam were some of the same people associated with this gay mafia network and nexus down in the city.
And then in New York City, this is a little bit before your time, and I hate to mention the word, it might trigger you. Disco. Disco.
No, I like disco.
The disco explosion happened shortly after that. Now, Studio 54, Steve Rubel, all the beautiful people, the glitterati coming in, and all that money that was being filtered through there, totally mobbed up.
Right.
So
and don't forget
part of the cultural world transfer. I mean, you got RuPaul, who's on prime time now, promoting that same agenda to the boys and girls of America and the world.
And listen, it's having an effect, because I just read yesterday that 28%, or maybe it was 38% of kids who are like, I don't know, 17 to 24 identify as LGBTQ. This is not organic and real. That can't be. So they're being obviously groomed into this, much like Gajdusek groomed his victims, as we saw earlier. Society is now grooming on a massive scale these kids to just totally be messed up, mind controlled, and also great potential consumers of their pharmaceutical products, because with that lifestyle usually comes depression, anxiety. These people are on all sorts of meds a lot of times. Now I'm generalizing, but
suicidal ideations.
Suicidal ideations, exactly. And so, yeah, what better way to ensure a population that's going to use your pharmaceutical products than by stoking fears, making everybody depressed, ruining the family structure, and to me,
and one of the main one of the main contributors to that whole cultural engineering and really a business model is the Pritzker family. The
Right.
Pritzker, heavily involved. Of course, they made their nut in hotels, right? Hospitality, which, by the way, they expropriated Japanese American property in World War II. That
Oh,
was
no
the
kidding.
basis of the Pritzker family. And then they launder those proceeds. They're heavily involved in transgender hormonal treatments. They have a Penny Pritzker as sort of a spokesmodel for this transformation of
Right, and
society.
it really is. And the upshot is we are all screwed, because without the family structure and with everybody being atomized, we are easily conquered, as we're seeing right now. I mean, I think we're doomed personally.
Well, not with your work. You and Jason Goodman and the people who have come forward, you're an army of resistors to this takeover, and I congratulate you for that. Now, I just wanted to interject one other elite cult, because it comes from top down, obviously. One other elite connection that probably crossed your mind, but there was another ultra high IQ individual who had access to elite circles in New York City cultural milieu and the political milieu and the business world. And he was also one of the highly regarded staff photographers for Life magazine, which is Time Life, Loose, CIA, Skull and Bones, and all that. And then he was later given the green light to become a film director. And he made any number of what are now considered classic films, including Dr. Strangelove. But the reason why I'm alluding to this person is because his classic movie, you guessed it, Eyes Wide Shut, echoes the scenario that you've been laying out for the past 50 minutes, Manny. This is Stanley Kubrick.
Yep, and Kubrick was, said to be a major insider and knew what these people were up to.
And Tom Cruise was what was his profession in Eyes Wide Shut?
A doctor.
Medical doctor.
Exactly. So yes, this Gajdusek character, it's like, I don't know. I think I'm starting something here that is gonna just become a snowball, because I've been harping on this Gajdusek now for a couple weeks, and it's really starting to get out there, and it's really starting to interest a lot of people. In fact, much more so than Son of Sam in a weird way. People are becoming obsessed with finding out everything they can about this sick guy, because I think, especially given the experience the last whatever it is 18 months with this horrific lockdownism and all this new normal BS, it all came out of the bowels. Well, some of it, of course, it's Rockefeller and Lockstep and all of that stuff, but it's aided and abetted by the NIH and Anthony Fauci, who happened to be working at the same NIH when Carleton Gajdusek was there back in the late 70s. So this whole NIH elitist network of doctors, and even the Nobel Prize, we have to start thinking about that.
And of course, Fauci made his bones in the late 70s and 80s as, guess what, a so-called AIDS researcher. And where was his experimental laboratory? The West Village, the gay population.
The gay population, exactly. Gary Null, I don't know if you know Gary Null, the nutritionist and political activist. He talked about, I remember hearing Anthony Fauci's name in 1998, listening to Gary Null. And he talked all about how Fauci, now I didn't know who Fauci was then, it was just some name, but he was always talking about how Fauci was a criminal. And he totally, this AIDS thing was a total sham, and how this guy was basically a total crook, and AZT and all the drugs were killing the AIDS patients. So when I heard Fauci's name in 2020, I knew right then and there that we were in for some serious hurt.
Another individual whose work needs to be revisited right now is the great Dr. Leonard Horowitz, who wrote the classic book Emerging Viruses, and like Gary Null, released 2 or 3 or 4 DVDs, documentaries, some of which are available on TubeView, ironically.
Okay.
But we need to go back into that literature that was coming out, because this is going to rearm us against the current assault, which is really the second wave of an assault that was let loose on the American public and the world back in the late 70s and 80s, coming out of the same, as you identified, institutions such as the National Institutes of Ill Health.
Right.
Right. And the Surgeon General, of course. See, this is all a Pentagon military operation at bottom, right? He's the Surgeon General. He came into that position when the United States was going into overseas conquest. Like, it might not have been Melanesia, but it was close. It was the Philippines.
Right.
So all of this is related to this American imperial colonial history. And now we, who were supposedly the beneficiaries of all that largesse that came in from all overseas empires, now it's blown back down to us, Manny. This is
Exactly
what's happening.
And if
Please.
we can expose these guys as potential child ritual murderers rather than respected scientists, well, then maybe we can actually make a dent in the narrative out there. And that's what I'm hoping.
And also animal torturers.
Oh, this guy Gajdusek was involved in all sorts of stuff with monkey research and this guy Gajdusek, he worked, I think he was like 18 years old. Maybe he was a little younger, but there was a plant research institute almost literally across the street from Untermeyer Park, called the Boyce Thompson Institute. And Gajdusek actually invented one of the first commercial weed killers, which I found interesting because those weed killers, as you know, as a gardener, they're extremely mutagenic, carcinogenic. They're destroying, and they're also destroying the sexuality of males in particular. They're kind of turning males into females. And I don't know about you, but one thing I noticed in the last 15 years is that men are becoming much weaker, much more feminine. And maybe they knew back then that this would happen with estrogen and mimicking estrogen. So yeah, these guys need to be exposed because it's almost like they're doing Dr. Mengele style work, and we can't have a nation and a republic anymore with this type of stuff happening. We have to expose it and we have to put an end to it. I mean, it's gone far beyond just like tolerating it and talking about it. We need to actually end it.
Right. I mean, someone asked me to do a book review of A Course in Miracles, but I'd rather do a review of a book on criminal indictments. That's what we need at this point. The study session, study hall is about over. All the information it's there, and there needs to be some criminal indictments right now. Otherwise, even the people who think they're the beneficiaries of this wicked system are going down. They're the first ones to go down. Look what happened to David Berkowitz. He's still in prison, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah. So all the people who think they're beneficiaries, wise up and get on the right side of history. Now, before we have a few minutes left here, Manny, do you want to talk a little bit about what Dr. Gajdusek, he's a medical doctor, he got his MD, guess where, from Harvard.
Right, Harvard.
And I think he might have been involved with some similar programs that he was later called the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, this was the mind control and all that type of trauma-based sex control, right? But do you want to give the audience an idea of what Dr. Gajdusek how did he get his Nobel Prize? What was his specialty?
He got it studying Kuru disease in I don't remember exactly what country, but it was a study on cannibalism, on actually eating people's brains. So God knows what this guy was doing, even to Etan Pates. I mean, let's face it. But I've been so concentrated on the criminal aspect of this, Professor Hamamoto, that the medical stuff, I know that he was involved in Kuru and mad cow disease and prion research. Yeah. But what that all means is actually goes over my head. But what's beautiful about this crowdsourced investigation that I'm doing is that I don't have to worry about that. I have two guys coming on my show next week on our Monday night show with Jason that are esteemed scientists. One's from Princeton and another one is from, I don't know, Rice University. I don't remember exactly, but they're coming on to talk about his research. And in fact, they're going to come on and talk about why his research was actually garbage. Yeah, so that should be very interesting for people who are interested in that aspect of this, because I can't know it all. And
Right.
my main thing is the cultural anthropology and the criminal aspect of it. That's what really gets me. But
Well,
yeah,
Mr. Grossman, your research, your path-breaking research has opened up so many avenues for specialists, including the people you're having on next week, medical forensics, right?
right.
Medical anthropology, that we are able to, we, the audience, we, the public, are able to come up with a far more comprehensive explanatory framework that names names and institutions that any so-called mainstream media could ever hope to accomplish. And for
Right.
that, we owe you an incredible debt of gratitude.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. All I'm doing is walking the streets of Yonkers and trying to tell some stories. And that's kind of how it all started. I never dreamed that I'd be doing this 7 months later, but it's been a blast. And I hope to keep on doing it for a long time, because I really do feel like we are actually making waves out there, and that this research, especially into Gajdusek, I feel it's the key to not only Son of Sam, but the key, as you say, to all sorts of criminal enterprises that need to be exposed.
And there's also connections, tendrils, if you will, or tentacles that extend to other types of crimes that are now also being revealed. I see an incredible parallel with Dr. Gajdusek with another medical doctor, Dr. George Codell, who his son has singled in on and really, to my satisfaction, has identified him as the so-called Black Dahlia killer.
Oh, interesting. The guy who split somebody in half, essentially.
Precisely.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
the final question. Yeah. So this is something we can talk about at another point, but just keep it in the back of your mind. But my
Definitely.
final question to you, because I think your background in landscape architecture is really has provided a foundation. I think you can see patterns, you can see designs, and you can see details that the layman cannot comprehend. It's just indifferent information. But I want to ask you, in any of your research so far, do you find any indication of these victims, where they're placed? Is there some sense of an art project that's being enacted, a ritualistic performance piece, let's say, on the part of Gajdusek? That seems to be a pattern amongst these high-level, high IQ medical doctors who think that they have God powers.
Right. I mean, I can't answer that for sure, other than to say that according to Tiny Lentini, it was extremely much like the Eyes Wide Shut movie that we talked about earlier. It was a ritual much like that. So these guys were into that type of activity. Other than that, I really don't have a good answer to that question, unfortunately, Professor.
All right. Now, Mr. Grossman, where can we find you? Where can we sign up for Subscribestar? Please give us the details.
Thank you. Well, you could go to my YouTube channel, which is just Manny Grossman YouTube. There we have all of our legacy videos. I started this in March of this year, and I always suggest people start from the beginning, because it really has been a journey of discovery where every video builds upon itself. And there's probably like 50 videos on there now. But in August, we went on to Subscribestar, the Subscribestar platform, which I have to say, Professor, Subscribestar and all these paid sites, so far I'm very unimpressed with their clunkiness. They're like something out of the 1990s, and it really hampers a lot, because people get so sort of pissed off having to deal with some old style website, right? That it's not a convenient like YouTube. But I always tell the people that we're pioneers in this new digital age, micro patronage of your favorite content creators, and that as it gets more and more popular, hopefully these websites will get better. I mean, remember, YouTube has billions of dollars to invest in servers and all sorts of chat platforms and the greatest code writers that they could possibly hire. But we're on Subscribestar, where we have done probably about, 20 new, maybe 25 new videos since then. And the Subscribestar is where all of the hardest hitting stuff goes up. And every now and then I'll throw a freebie on YouTube, but we're keeping it basically on Subscribestar, because again, it's a full-time job. This has become like I'm running almost like the investigation, but I'm also running a PR company in a sense, because I'm dealing with so many people and having to connect so many people that but again, like I said, it's just extremely satisfying, and I'm glad that I made the switch from gardening. Well, I didn't make it on my own. I was forced out by the leftists in New York City because I wouldn't wear a mask, and also the leftists at New York Botanical Garden for daring to question the narrative. Got fired from all those things and ended up having to do this as an alternative. And I really believe it was some higher power really made it happen, because it's just been wonderful. And of course, being on your show has helped me greatly. So I really appreciate your help, Professor.
I appreciate it. It's been providential, your path to this point, and as it continues long into the future. Now, I'll just conclude by saying that you're going to stick with the web-based. I'm going old school, right? People are going with Pro Tools in the studio. Some people are staying with tape. I'm an analog guy. I'm a tape dude. So I'm going to go to AM radio. I want to occupy the spot that's been vacated by William Cooper and Art Bell. And when I get that AM gig, you're going to be a frequent guest.
Oh, well, I'm there in a heartbeat, Professor.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Grossman. Thank you very much, everybody in the live chat. And we'll speak soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye.